Paul will get in a cab, Linda complained during an interview in mid-1974, and the driver will say, "Oh, it's not as good as it used to be, is it, Paul? It's not like the Beatles." Well, sure, he gets hurt by that. If he's going through a bad period, give him a bit of positiveness and he might go out and write a great song. People are vulnerable. They're only so strong. It's like a great racehorse. If the owner whipped it and didn't treat it well, the horse would become a nervous wreck. Hi, welcome to Billy's Books. We're going to review the McCartney Legacy, Volume 2. I reviewed Volume 1 last year, I suppose. That was the McCartney story. This whole Legacy series goes into great detail, almost week by week, of his career. And it's really interesting. So Volume 1 was 1969 through 1973, which was a pretty crappy time for him. The Beatles broke up, and then he started to tried to get Wings off the ground, but it wasn't so easy. This Volume 2 is 74 to 1980, so it's kind of the good years for Wings, which is they have a world tour and then keep on rocking. So that's good. That opening teaser I mentioned Linda talking about Paul's insecurities. I'm going to read another Paul's insecurity story here. When I go out there on stage, if I saw anyone walk out or light a cigarette, I'd think, "Oh God, I've lost them." You see, I must misread so badly all the time. If I do see someone leaving the theater while I'm singing, I've got to remind myself they might be going to the lavatory. It really could be that, but instinctively I just go, "Oh no, they hate me. I'm no good. I'm a born worrier." It's like the old Indian saying, "I walk down the street and I'm crying because I have no shoes, and then I see a man with no feet. I must try and remind myself that I've got feet." See, even a rock star like Paul is insecure. It's amazing. That's the human condition, I suppose. Anyway, so because this goes step by step through their whole lives, it's really, really interesting. Last we knew, they had recorded Band on the Run, and it was climbing the charts and stuff like that. And he was trying to assemble a live band because two of the guys had left just before Band on the Run. So Band on the Run had been recorded just by Paul, Linda, and Denny, with Paul playing the drums and everything. But Paul wanted to get Wings up on the road, so they had to hire some more guys. They eventually did that. But while they were recording, so they got a new drummer, Jeff Britton. They auditioned a bazillion drummers, and a lot of them were really good, and some of them were big names. But they chose Jeff, and after all these people, and Jeff was kind of a nobody, but he showed up to the audition, and he was like asked later, "Paul, why did you choose me over all these other hotshots?" And he was like, "Well, you have a good feel and all that, but also you were the only drummer who pulled the volume back when I stepped up to the mic." They got a new guitarist named Jimmy McCulloch, not to be confused with Henry McCulloch. They're both hot shit guitar players, and they both drank way too much, which led to problems for both of them. Anyway, they're both amazing guitar players. So he got a band, and they were in the studio, and when Wings records in the studio, it's sort of news, unless it's London. Wherever else they record, say Jamaica, or New Orleans, or Nashville, it's big news and everyone comes by to hang out. So at one of these sessions, I don't even remember which one because I just put it in my notes, but the Carpenters wanted to stop by. They called and they said, "Is it okay if we visit you guys in the studio?" And Paul's response was, "Yeah, but don't bring a big group, just you guys." And then he calls back Richard, two of the Carpenters. He calls back and says, "Is it okay if my sister comes along?" Which is, that just shows you the times that, that he would have to ask for Karen Carpenter to come because he's the lesser known person, just the way things were back then. And then when they finally got there, the two of them, they were described as two timid little mice. So Karen and her brother, whatever his name is, Carpenter, they came to the studio to visit Wings, and then they were just really quiet and hid in the corner. While they were working on the next album, Band on the Run became the Yankees' theme song because they had played it before a game at the beginning of a game where they won some gloriously. So after that, they used "Band the Run" for the rest of the season or something, because once you have an idea, once you have some sort of tradition in baseball, you have to beat it to the ground. Beat it to the ground. So here's Paul in the studio. "He's marvelous, the way he deals with musicians," Tattersall said shortly after the sessions. "He got this incredible oboe solo out of this middle-aged woman. He was sort of egging her on, saying, 'Yes, and bend a note here,' and stuff like that. She was pretty amazed at what she had been able to do. His whole approach and friendliness endeared him to the session musicians." So Paul was good with the orchestra people usually. The orchestral session came off almost, but not entirely, without a hitch. Through several takes, the principal cellist seemed to be having difficulty phrasing the short cello obbligato in "Live and Let Die." The part was not that difficult, and Paul, noticing that it was 4:50 p.m., just 10 minutes before overtime rates would kick in, walked down the long staircase from Studio 2 control room and took Newman aside. "He wants to go into overtime, doesn't he?" Paul asked. "Do you mind if I take over?" Newman handed Paul a baton, and Paul told the cellist, "Right, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll sing it, and you play it." He then sang the cello line, using the names of the chords as lyrics, leaving the player no course but to play the line as Paul sang it before doing a final take. "It was so fucking brilliant," Litchfield marveled, "that when he finished, the entire orchestra stood up and gave Paul a standing ovation. The cellist got outgunned. It was wonderful. It was a private piece of musicianship the like of which I've never seen before, and certainly never since." The situation with the drinking McCulloch number 2, Jimmy McCulloch, he and Denny Lane, the two guitar players in the band, both hit it off in the sense that they both really enjoyed drinking and smoking really a lot, and they got into a lot of trouble. Denny was a pretty cool guy with Paul, but I guess the young Jimmy McCulloch, also enjoying all of his troublesomeness, sort of was a bad influence on Denny, so Denny would get into more trouble with Jimmy around. So Wings is on tour, they have a great show. This is afterwards. "That night saw a brief scuffle between McCartney and a drunken McCulloch. Paul spoke about the incident through the veil of diplomacy, telling Paul Dunoyer that, 'You want your kip? And Jimmy, he'd be in the next hotel room to you, blasting music after coming in off the piss at 4 in the morning. I'd have to go to him and say, "Hey Jim, do us a favor, man." "Okay, sorry man, where you asleep?" "Oh, okay, aye." But one of the road crew remembered the encounter ending differently, telling a friend, "When Paul approached him, Jimmy told Paul to fuck off. Paul's response was to knock him out cold." They also formed a clique between the two of them, which put sort of Jeff, the drummer, sort of outside of all that, because he was, Jeff the drummer was a different kind of guy. He was like, these other guys were into drinking and smoking and all that, and he was more into karate and being clean and living a healthy lifestyle, and he was more athletic, and he didn't fit in. And he didn't just not fit in, but Jimmy actively disliked Jeff. So there was all sorts of conflict between the band, and Jeff realized after a while that he was at the bottom of the pecking order. Paul and Linda were at the top, Denny and Jimmy were in the middle, and he was at the bottom. Wings went to Nashville to record some stuff. They recorded Junior's Farm there. Junior's Farm is actually where they stayed. They stayed at a farm, and the nickname of the guy that, who owned the place was called Junior, so that was perfect for that. They did a lot of takes there. Unfortunately, Jeff, because being all athletic, he broke his foot and tried to hide it for a while, but of course it just got worse. And that impeded some of his drumming skills when they were trying to record, which did not endear him to anybody. The antics were so bad in Nashville that, Paul had understood that the first lineup, Wings Mark I as they call it, with the elder McCulloch and the first drummer, Denny Sewell, didn't work out, partly because of the money situation, because they were just sort of, being paid very cheap and sort of just to hang out all the time, whether or not they did anything. And he was like, okay, this time we'll get a better contract to make them feel better about, being a real member of the band, and they have royalties to be sharing and all like that. But they're writing it up while Denny and Jimmy were getting worse and worse about drinking and acting stupid and driving cars into ditches and stuff like that. So that you know, at a certain point, something went down so bad they had to cancel rehearsal for 2 days or something because Jimmy did something so stupid that they couldn't. And he was like, that contract. So they blew their own chance of getting a better contract as a result of that. So they were back on like just being paid as session musicians, even though Paul was trying to get the band vibe. And it was, I think, a challenge for him for that reason. And he was planning a world tour, and he was like, he wanted the sound to be really good because sound was meh. So he went to a lot of big shows to see different bands see their and get their sound. He went when he saw Led Zeppelin, and he was like, they have good sound. So he contacted their Led Zeppelin's group and asked them to do sound for Wings as well, and they did. And they were called Shoko, I think. And so he got the state-of-the-art, biggest, coolest sound for Wings as well. And clearly it mattered because later on, when they started playing with that outfit and with that lineup, people were like, "Oh my God, this is so good." So I think seeing Wings in 1975 or 1976 was probably quite glorious. While they were preparing for their world tour, they had already recorded Venus and Mars, and then which took a long time. And then Paul was like, well, we got to squeeze in another album before we go to America. So they recorded Wings at the Speed of Sound. And apparently that went really fast, strangely enough. Like they recorded, it seems to have not taken them very long at all to record that album, which is probably a good sign. It means that the band had already gelled. And it also meant, and I guess he said that Paul's thought was that Wings at the Speed of Sound was simpler music than Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars was complicated, but this was going to be simpler music. Except that then, of course, on top of that, he also did Silly Love Songs, which was not simple at all. It's really interesting the way they talk about Silly Love Songs. Paul wanted it to be a disco song, and instead of teaching the whole song to the band, it was just, he did what he kind of did sometimes in the Beatles, which was just piano and drums. So he just played a real basic piano part, and told the drummer to play all these complicated things, like, okay, here it's going to be do-do-do-do-do-do. So he was like, it's just, the drummer had to remember all these complicated things just to go with a real basic part on the piano. And then later on, they overdub all the other stuff. He had it all, Paul had it all in his head, but I don't know if the drummer did. By the way, the replacement for Jeff Britton, drummer, because he eventually left, they booted him for a number of reasons, and replaced him. Jeff Britton, a Brit, was replaced by Joe English, an American, who was much better, and I'm glad they made that choice. And he fit in much better with the band. Even though he still didn't get along with the guitarists, he did get along better with Paul and Linda, and he seemed like a real pussycat who rocked. He was a fantastic drummer. If you want to see that lineup, you should watch the show Rock Show, which is the Wings concert film of their 1976 tour. There's also Wings Over America is that same tour, that same set list on album, which sounds fantastic. Oh, anyway, so Silly Love Songs, right. So it's very complicated, but interesting about that is also Paul often recorded the bass, not in the live sessions, but later on to overdub it so we could get everything just right. And he did that with Silly Love Songs, and that whole bass line, do 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 do, all that stuff is just, it's like a perfect, cool, everyone loves it bass line and stuff like that. I had always thought that he had composed that since he had the whole song in his head, but no, he didn't have all the song in his head. He had everything, all the whole arrangement, but then when he recorded the bass, he just did that on the fly and wrote this amazing bass line. And everybody in the band was like, he had all that in mind, but then he did that. And it's just like, everyone is impressed by, well, big surprise, people think that Paul's a good bass player. That is from the album Wings at the Speed of Sound, as it is said, and interestingly, Paul gets his inspiration for titles and things in all sorts of weird places. You know, he had written a song for Venus and Mars as an opener, but didn't think of calling the album Venus and Mars for a long time. For Wings at the Speed of Sound, he was inspired because in 1976 was the first official flight of the Concorde, which of course exceeds the speed of sound. And so he was inspired by that and thought it was perfect for a band that's on tour over the world. I can tell you that they're going to have a glorious tour in 1976, and then they're going to take a break, and they're going to go into Yacht Rock in 1978 for London Town, and then they're going to, in 1979, he's going to get a new lineup because the drummer and guitar player quit again, so he has to get a new drummer and guitar player who are also really good. They're going to change their sound to much more aggressive again for 1979. And then they're going to tour in 1980, and Paul is going to be an idiot and have a big bag of weed in his suitcase, which the Japanese are going to catch. And that's the end of the Japanese tour, and by default, the end of Wings. Anyway, I'm really enjoying this book. So, if you like Paul or the Beatles or whatever, or just general rock and roll stories, this is pretty interesting. I would say it's more enjoyable than the first one, but only because it's not as sad. They're both fascinating. Also, by 1975, the Beatles had most of their legal problems out of the way, so they could hang out again. And there's even some mention of when they were in New Orleans recording in New Orleans, Venus and Mars, Paul had invited John down to possibly, hang out with the band and record, maybe even write some stuff. And John was like, whoa, maybe, but I got to think about it. And he thought about it and opted not to. But before he just officially said he wasn't going to, Paul had gone back to the studio and said, maybe next week John might come by. And he thought that was cool news. But everybody in the recording studio and everybody else in the band were like, oh no, that's going to be a huge distraction. So when John bailed later on, I think most people were really glad. Anyway, I'm enjoying this book. If you can't review.